The attorney's office smelled of old leather and disappointment. Daniel Wilson sat in the back row of chairs facing Mr. Hargreaves' mahogany desk, watching as the lawyer shuffled through the papers that would determine how his grandfather's life would be divided among the living. Around him sat his cousins, aunts, and uncles, all wearing their best funeral clothes and expressions of barely concealed anticipation. Samuel Wilson had been the patriarch of their family for as long as Daniel could remember. At 87, he had owned 300 acres of prime farmland in Riverdale, Montana, a house that had been in their family for 4 generations, and a collection of antique farming equipment worth more than most people's retirement savings. Everyone assumed there would be enough to go around. Mr. Hargreaves cleared his throat and began reading the formal language that lawyers use to distribute a lifetime of work and memory. Daniel's cousin Eric inherited the main farmhouse and half the acreage. His cousin Rachel got the other half of the land and the modern farming equipment. His Aunt Amelia received Samuel's stock portfolio and savings account. Uncle Robert got the vintage car collection that Samuel had been restoring in his spare time. Daniel listened to each bequest with growing anxiety, waiting to hear his name. Samuel and he had been closer than he'd been with most of the other grandchildren. He'd spent every summer on his farm from the time he was 8 until he enlisted in the military. Samuel had taught him to drive his old John Deere tractor, shown him how to read the weather patterns that determined planting season, and shared stories about their family's history that went back 5 generations. When Mr. Hargreaves finished reading the will, Daniel's name hadn't been mentioned once. Not for land, not for money, not even for one of Samuel's old tools that he'd helped him use countless times. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone processed what they'd inherited and what Daniel apparently hadn't. As his family filed out of the office, making plans for dividing up possessions and taking ownership of properties, Daniel sat alone in that chair trying to understand why Samuel had left him nothing at all. His 10 years of military service as a mechanical engineer had taught him to solve complex problems. But this puzzle felt impossible to decipher. 3 days after the will reading, Daniel drove out to Samuel's farm one last time before Eric took possession. The house sat empty, its windows reflecting the late afternoon sun like closed eyes. He had a key. Samuel had given it to him years ago, but using it now felt like trespassing on someone else's property. He walked around the property instead, visiting places where Samuel and he had spent time together. The old barn where he'd taught him to milk cows. The workshop where they had rebuilt engines and fixed anything that broke around the farm. The vegetable garden where he'd shown him the difference between weeds and the plants they wanted to keep. Every corner of this place held memories of conversations with Samuel that had shaped who Daniel had become. He'd never been a man who expressed emotions easily, but he'd shown his love through patience, through teaching, through the time he'd invested in helping Daniel understand the world beyond textbooks and classrooms. Standing in the workshop, Daniel remembered a conversation they'd had the previous spring. He'd been helping Samuel overhaul the engine on his 1952 Farmall tractor when he'd stopped working and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Dan, he'd said, using his full name instead of the Danny he'd called him since childhood. You understand that the most valuable things a man owns aren't always the things that show up on paper, don't you? Daniel had nodded, thinking Samuel was talking about memories and family relationships. He'd continued working on the engine, but Daniel could tell he had more to say. Sometimes the things that matter most are the things nobody else knows about the things that don't get written down in wills or talked about at family dinners. At the time, Daniel had thought he was being philosophical, maybe reflecting on mortality as old people sometimes do. Now standing in his empty workshop, he wondered if Samuel had been trying to tell him something specific, something important that he'd been too young or too distracted to understand. The memory of that conversation haunted him as he drove home that evening, wondering if he'd missed something crucial in his grandfather's words. Daniel had recently left the military after a decade of service, specializing in restoring and modifying vintage mechanical equipment for specialized operations. His skills were highly sought after by engineering firms, but he'd been struggling to adjust to civilian life. 3 months of interviews had yielded no job that felt right, and his longtime girlfriend, Lisa, had recently ended their 5-year relationship when he'd suggested they might eventually settle somewhere rural rather than staying in the city. 2 weeks later, Eric called with an offer that surprised Daniel. He'd moved into Samuel's house and had been going through the accumulation of 8 decades of rural living. The barn was full of equipment and tools that weren't specifically mentioned in the will, and he needed help sorting through everything before the farm auction scheduled for the following month. "I know this is awkward, Dan." Eric's voice carried the weight of family obligation. "But you knew Samuel's stuff better than any of us. You spent more time out here learning about his tools and equipment. I could really use your help figuring out what's valuable and what's just junk taking up space." The invitation felt like a mercy. Daniel had been struggling with a sense of disconnection from his family since the will reading, feeling like he'd been erased from Samuel's legacy. The chance to spend time on the farm again, even if it belonged to someone else now, was something. He drove out the next Saturday morning, arriving to find Eric standing in the barn looking overwhelmed by the sheer volume of stuff that Samuel had accumulated over the years. Farm equipment from different eras was stacked and stored in every available space. Hand tools hung on pegboards that covered entire walls. Boxes of spare parts, hardware, and mysterious mechanical components filled shelves that reached to the barn's rafters. "Where do we even start?" Eric asked, gesturing helplessly at the controlled chaos around them. Daniel looked around the barn, remembering hundreds of hours he'd spent here with Samuel. Every tool had its place. Every piece of equipment had its purpose, even if that purpose wasn't immediately obvious to someone who hadn't spent years learning Samuel's organizational system. "We start with the antique equipment. That's where the real value is." Samuel had some pieces that collectors would pay serious money for. They spent the morning cataloging the most valuable pieces, and Eric was amazed by the potential worth of equipment he'd initially dismissed as junk. Daniel focused on identifying the items that would interest collectors and museums, drawing on years of knowledge that Samuel had shared with him. In the far corner of the barn, covered by a canvas tarp that had seen better years, sat Samuel's most prized piece of antique equipment, an 1898 John Deere plow that had belonged to his grandfather. Daniel had heard the story of this plow dozens of times. It had broken the original sod on the land that became their family farm, and Samuel considered it the foundation of everything their family had built over the generations. Eric had never paid much attention to the plow during family visits, but when Daniel pulled off the tarp and revealed the ornate metalwork and pristine condition of the century-old implement, his eyes widened with surprise. "This thing is in incredible shape," he said, running his hand along the curved moldboard that had been polished to a mirror finish. "It looks like it was made yesterday." Daniel explained how Samuel had spent countless hours maintaining the plow, not because he planned to use it, but because it represented the sweat and determination of the man who'd started their family's farming legacy. Every winter, Samuel would strip it down completely, oil every moving part, and reassemble it with the care of someone working on a priceless artifact. "This probably belongs in a museum," Eric said. "Or maybe we should keep it in the family." As they examined the plow more closely, Daniel noticed something he had never seen before. The metal base where the plow attached to the tractor tongue was secured with bolts that looked different from the rest of the hardware. They were newer, shinier, and seemed out of place on such an old implement. He knelt down to get a better look and realized that what he was seeing wasn't original equipment. Someone had modified the plow's base, adding a small metal compartment that was hidden beneath the main frame. The compartment was secured with a simple latch, but it had been painted to match the rest of the plow so perfectly that it was nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Daniel's heart started beating faster as he remembered Samuel's words about valuable things that don't show up on paper. This hidden compartment couldn't be accidental, and the careful modifications suggested someone had spent considerable time creating this secret space. The discovery felt deeply personal, like a message meant specifically for someone who would understand the significance of this particular hiding place. He looked up at Eric, who was examining other equipment and hadn't noticed Daniel's discovery. Something told him that this moment was meant to be private part of a larger puzzle that Samuel had carefully constructed. Daniel waited until Eric took a break for lunch before returning to the plow. His hands were shaking slightly as he worked the hidden latch, wondering what Samuel might have concealed in such an unusual hiding place. The compartment opened smoothly, revealing a small waterproof pouch that had been carefully wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside the pouch, he found 3 items that made his breath catch in his throat. The first was a small brass key attached to a chain, old but well-maintained, with the numbers 427 etched into the metal. The second was a folded piece of paper with his name written on the outside in Samuel's distinctive handwriting. The third was a photograph he'd never seen before. The photograph showed Samuel as a young man, maybe in his early 20s, standing next to a woman Daniel didn't recognize. They were both smiling and the woman was holding a baby. On the back of the photograph, someone had written Samuel, Margaret, and little Sarah 1955 in fading ink. Daniel had never heard Samuel mention anyone named Margaret, and he'd certainly never heard about a daughter named Sarah. According to family history, Samuel had married Daniel's grandmother, Eleanor, in 1958, and their first child, Daniel's father, wasn't born until 1960. This photograph suggested a part of Samuel's life that no one in the family knew about. The letter addressed to Daniel was brief, but loaded with implications that made his head spin. Dan, if you're reading this, then you found what I hoped you'd find. Some stories are too complicated to tell while people are still living, but too important to take to the grave. The key opens safe deposit box 427 at First Montana Bank in town. Mr. Peterson knows you're coming, and he has the second key. What you find there will help you understand why I couldn't put certain things in my will. The choice of what to do with this information is yours, but I trust you to do what's right. You always understood the farm better than anyone else in the family. Love, Grandpa Samuel. Daniel sat in the barn holding these artifacts of a secret history, trying to process what Samuel was telling him. A safe deposit box. A banker who knew he was coming. A photograph of people who weren't part of the family story he'd grown up with. And a key that would unlock whatever truth Samuel had hidden. He carefully returned the items to the pouch, closed the compartment, and replaced the tarp over the plow. He needed to think about his next steps, and he didn't want Eric to discover what he'd found just yet. Daniel's military training had taught him to be methodical to assess situations before acting. He needed more information before he opened that safe deposit box. He decided to visit William Cooper, Samuel's old friend and the former family lawyer who had retired a few years earlier. If anyone might know about Samuel's past, it would be William. William's modest house sat on the edge of town surrounded by a meticulously maintained garden. At 78, William was still sharp-minded and physically active. He welcomed Daniel with a firm handshake and led him to a sunroom overlooking his vegetable garden. "I've been expecting you," William said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Samuel told me you might come around after the will reading." "Did he tell you why he left me nothing?" Daniel asked, unable to keep the hurt from his voice. William studied him for a moment. Samuel had his reasons for everything he did. He wasn't a man who made decisions lightly. He paused. "Did you know he had a secret compartment in his antique plow?" William's eyebrows raised slightly, but his expression remained neutral. Samuel was always creating hiding places around the farm. "Did you find something interesting?" Daniel hesitated, then decided to trust William. He pulled out the photograph and slid it across the table. William picked it up, and a sad smile crossed his face. "Margaret," he said softly. "I wondered if he'd ever tell anyone about her." "Who was she? And who's Sarah?" William leaned back in his chair. "Samuel never told you about his time in the military. He said he served in Korea, but he didn't talk about it much. After Korea, he was stationed in California, San Diego. That's where he met Margaret Weber. They fell in love quickly, got married in 1954. Sarah was born in 1950. Daniel felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. What happened to them? Margaret died in a car accident in 1956. Samuel was devastated. He was still in the service. Couldn't care for a baby on his own. Margaret's parents, the Webers, offered to raise Sarah. It nearly broke him to give us up, but he knew it was best for her. Why didn't he ever tell the family? Why keep it secret all these years? William sighed deeply. When he came back to Montana after his discharge, he was a changed man. Met your grandmother, Eleanor, fell in love again. But back then, divorce was scandalous enough. A previous marriage, a child given up for adoption. These weren't things people talked about openly. As time passed, it became harder to explain why he'd kept the secret for so long. Daniel thought about the key in his pocket. He left me a key to a safe deposit box at First Montana Bank Box 427. He said Mr. Peterson would be expecting me. James Peterson, the former bank president. He and Samuel went way back. James retired a couple years ago, but he still goes in a few days a week to help with the transition. If Samuel sets something up with him, James will honor it. William's eyes grew serious. The question is, are you ready to carry whatever burden comes with that trust? The weight of the key in Daniel's pocket felt heavier than ever. Samuel was the person I respected most in this world. If he thought I could handle this, then I have to trust that. As Daniel prepared to leave, William placed a hand on his shoulder. Be careful who you trust with whatever you find. There are people in this town who might not want certain stories coming to light after all these years. Daniel drove to a nearby gas station to gather his thoughts before heading to the bank. He needed to process everything William had told him. Samuel had had another family before the one Daniel knew. A wife who died young, a daughter given up for adoption, secrets kept for over 60 years. As he pumped gas into his truck, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the adjacent pump. Eric stepped out, his expression tense. Been looking for you, Eric said, approaching Daniel. You disappeared pretty quickly from the farm. Had some errands to run, Daniel replied, keeping his voice neutral. Eric's eyes narrowed. Find anything interesting under that tarp? Daniel felt a chill. Had Eric been watching him? Just the old plow? Why? Come on, Dan. I saw you messing with something under there. What did you find? The direct question caught Daniel off guard. What are you talking about? I'm talking about whatever Samuel hid for you. Eric said, his voice harder now. I heard him talking to William a few months ago about some special asset that wasn't in the will, something he was leaving for you to find. Daniel realized Eric must have been spying on Samuel, perhaps worried about his inheritance. If Samuel wanted you to know, he would have told you. Whatever it is, it belongs to the family, not just to you, Eric insisted. We're in this together. Pioneer Development is offering $20 million for the farm. We could all walk away rich, but only if we can deliver clear title to everything. Pioneer Development. Daniel hadn't heard this name before. They want to build a luxury resort and golf course. It's a good deal, Dan, but they need all the land, including whatever Samuel might have set aside secretly. The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about selling off the family legacy. I need to go, Daniel said, replacing the gas pump. If you find anything valuable, anything that affects the sale, we should talk about it first. Eric called after him. We're family. We should make these decisions together. Daniel drove away, his mind racing. Eric knew something was hidden, but not exactly what. And now there was this development company in the mix, offering enough money to tempt even the most sentimental family member. First Montana Bank was a single-story brick building in the center of town, one of the few structures that had been standing since before Samuel was born. Daniel walked in feeling oddly conspicuous, as if everyone could see the key burning a hole in his pocket. At the reception desk, he asked for Mr. Peterson. The young woman directed him to a small office in the back. James Peterson was a thin man in his early 80s, with a full head of white hair and alert blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. You must be Daniel Wilson, Peterson said, rising to shake his hand. You look just like your grandfather did at your age. You were expecting me. Samuel said you'd come eventually. Been waiting almost 15 years. I'd started to wonder if he'd changed his mind about the whole thing. Daniel pulled out the brass key. He left me this for box 427. Peterson nodded solemnly. I have the bank's matching key. Samuel set up specific instructions. The contents of that box are for your eyes only, at least initially. Your grandfather was very clear about that. When did he set this up? He opened the box in 1990, but he's been adding to it ever since. The last time was just a few months before he passed. Peterson led Daniel through a security door and into the vault area where rows of safe deposit boxes lined the walls. He located box 427, inserted his key in one lock, while Daniel inserted the brass key in the other. Together, they turned the keys and the box unlocked with a satisfying click. Peterson pulled the metal box from its slot and placed it on a private table in a small room adjacent to the vault. Take all the time you need. Just let me know when you are finished. Alone with the box, Daniel took a deep breath before lifting the lid. Inside, he found a collection of documents, photographs, and letters all meticulously organized. The top item was a sealed envelope with his name on it marked, "Read this first," in Samuel's handwriting. Daniel opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Dear Dan, if you're reading this, then you found my final secret and the one I've carried longer and kept more carefully than any other. I've rehearsed this letter in my mind for decades, never quite finding the right words to explain choices made by a younger man in circumstances you can probably hardly imagine. In 1954, while stationed in San Diego, I met a woman named Margaret Weber. She was intelligent, beautiful, and kind, working as a teacher on the base. We fell in love quickly, married within months. In 1955, our daughter Sarah was born. Those were the happiest days of my young life. Then in 1956, Margaret was killed in a car accident on her way home from work. I was devastated, lost in grief, and still committed to the military for another year. Margaret's parents offered to take Sarah and raise her until I could establish myself after discharge. It seemed like the best option for everyone, especially for Sarah, who would have stability and family who loved her. But when my service ended and I returned to Montana, I found the farm in trouble. My father was ill. The place was struggling financially, and I was still a broken man. The Webbers had given Sarah a good home, and disrupting her life again seemed selfish. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I agreed to let them adopt her legally. I returned to Montana intent on rebuilding my life and saving the family farm. I met Eleanor a year later, fell in love again, and started a new family. But I never forgot Sarah. I sent money regularly through a trust fund I established, which you'll find documented in this box. I kept track of her life through letters from the Webbers, who were kind enough to send photos and updates over the years. Why didn't I ever tell anyone? At first, it was simply too painful. Then as years passed and I built a life with Eleanor, it seemed unfair to her to reveal this part of my past. By the time Sarah was grown, I had children and eventually grandchildren who knew nothing about their half-sister. The secret had become too big, too potentially disruptive to share. But I couldn't bear the thought of dying without acknowledging Sarah in some way. She deserves to know she has family in Montana, and the family here deserves to know about her if they choose to. In this box, you'll find everything: marriage certificate, Sarah's birth certificate, adoption papers, the trust fund documents, and correspondence over the years. You'll also find the deed to 40 acres of the original homestead, the heart of the farm where everything began, that I kept separate from the main property. This land legally belongs to Sarah, though she doesn't know it yet. Why am I entrusting this to you, Dan? Because in all the family, you are the one who truly understands what the farm means beyond its cash value. You see the history, the connection to the past and future. You know that land isn't just property. It's a story written over generations. What you do with this information is your choice. Sarah Miller lives in San Diego, now retired from teaching. She's had a good life. She has children and grandchildren of her own. Her contact information is in the folder marked with her name. Whatever you decide, know that I trust your judgment. Some might say I've been a coward keeping this secret for so long. Maybe they're right, but we all make choices we have to live with. And we all carry burdens others can't see. I didn't leave you land or money in my will because I'm leaving you something more important: the truth and the power to decide what happens to it. I love you, grandson. I always have. Samuel. Daniel lowered the letter, his vision blurred by tears. The grandfather he thought he knew so well had carried this secret pain for decades. He began carefully examining the other contents of the box, spreading them out on the table. The marriage certificate confirmed Samuel Wilson and Margaret Weber had married in San Diego County on June 12, 1954. Sarah's birth certificate listed Samuel as her father. The adoption papers signed in 1957 showed Samuel had relinquished his parental rights to Robert and Helen Weber, Margaret's parents. The trust fund documentation revealed Samuel had been setting aside money monthly since 1957. Nearly $450,000 had accumulated over the decades. There were dozens of letters between Samuel and the Webers, spanning 60 years, with photographs of Sarah growing up, school pictures, graduation photos, wedding photos, pictures with her own children. Most surprising was a separate deed for 40 acres of the original Wilson homestead, the first parcel of land purchased by Samuel's grandfather in 1890. This land, which contained the original farmhouse and family cemetery, had been legally separated from the main farm property decades ago and was titled in a separate trust for Sarah Miller. Daniel was so absorbed in the documents that he didn't notice the door opening until a voice interrupted him. "Finding everything in order, Mr. Wilson." Daniel looked up to see a well-dressed man in his mid-40s standing in the doorway. He wasn't Peterson. "I'm Richard Blackwood, the new bank president," the man said, extending his hand. "Mr. Peterson mentioned you were accessing a long-dormant box." Daniel shook his hand reluctantly. "Yes, just reviewing some family documents." Blackwood glanced at the papers spread across the table. "I see. Old trusts and property deeds can be quite complex. I'd be happy to have our legal team review them for you. Ensure everything is in proper order." That won't be necessary, Daniel said, gathering the papers. These are private family matters. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, it's just that with properties changing hands, especially valuable farmland, we like to make sure all documentation is current and valid. I understand Pioneer Development has expressed interest in the Wilson property. Daniel felt a surge of suspicion. How did Blackwood know about Pioneer? And why was the bank president personally interested in these documents? I'll keep that in mind, Daniel said noncommittally. I should mention that Blackwood continued, that older trusts sometimes contain provisions that are no longer legally enforceable, and property transfers that weren't properly recorded with the county can create complications for current owners. If there's anything here that might affect the Wilson Farm sale prospects, our bank would be obligated to ensure all parties are properly informed. The threat was thinly veiled. Blackwood was fishing for information and suggesting he might interfere if he found something that complicated the Pioneer deal. I'll be sure to consult with my own attorney, Daniel replied coolly. Is there anything else? Blackwood smiled tightly. Not at all, just offering our services. Please take all the time you need. When you're finished, Ms. Williams at the front can assist you. After Blackwood left, Peterson slipped back into the room looking troubled. I apologize for that. Blackwood has been very interested in certain old accounts since he took over, particularly those connected to large land holdings. Is he involved with Pioneer Development somehow? Peterson nodded grimly. He's on their local advisory board. Many people in town are. The promise of tourism dollars and tax revenue has turned a lot of heads. Daniel understood the implications. I need copies of all these documents. Already prepared, Peterson said, pulling a thick envelope from his jacket. Samuel arranged for duplicates years ago, updated regularly. These are the most recent. Thank you, Daniel said, genuinely grateful. My grandfather was right to trust you. Samuel Wilson was the finest man I ever knew, Peterson said simply. Whatever he entrusted to you, he had good reason. Daniel carefully replaced the original documents in the safe deposit box, keeping only Samuel's letter to him. He secured the box of copies in his backpack and thanked Peterson again before leaving through a side door, avoiding the main lobby where Blackwood might be waiting. In his truck, Daniel sat for a moment, absorbing everything he'd learned. His grandfather had a whole other life that no one in the family knew about. A first love, a daughter, a secret he'd maintained for over 60 years. And now that secret was Daniel's responsibility. He drove to the small motel on the edge of town where he'd been staying, his mind racing with questions. What should he do with this information? Should he contact Sarah, tell the family? What about the 40 acres that legally belonged to Shrum but that Eric was planning to sell to Pioneer? When he reached his room, Daniel immediately sensed something was wrong. The door was slightly ajar, though he distinctly remembered locking it. Cautiously, he pushed it open to find his room had been searched. His clothes were disturbed, his laptop was open on the bed, and his duffel bag had been emptied onto the floor. He quickly checked his backpack. The document copies were still there. Whoever had searched his room hadn't found what they were looking for. As he began to gather his scattered belongings, there was a knock at the door. Sheriff Dawson stood outside, his weathered face solemn beneath his department hat. Dawson had been the county sheriff for as long as Daniel could remember. Evening, Dan, Dawson said. Got a call from the bank. Mr. Blackwood claims you may have removed confidential documents without authorization. That's not true, Daniel replied. I accessed my grandfather's safe deposit box with proper authorization and keys. Mr. Peterson can confirm that. Dawson nodded slightly. I figured as much. Blackwood's been throwing his weight around since he took over the bank. He lowered his voice. Listen, son, I need to tell you something, but not here. Can you meet me at William Cooper's place in an hour? It's about 30 minutes from here. William's why there? Because Samuel told me years ago that if you ever started asking questions about the safe deposit box, I should make sure you talk to William. And because this town isn't safe for that conversation right now. Too many ears working for Pioneer. Daniel studied the sheriff's face, looking for signs of deception. How did you know Samuel had a safe deposit box? Dawson smiled sadly. Samuel and I went to school together. I knew about Margaret. I was the one who called him when she had the accident. This unexpected connection to his grandfather's past convinced Daniel. I'll head to Williams now. Good. And Dan, don't trust anyone in this town right now. Pioneer isn't just after the farm for a resort. Those 40 acres Samuel kept separate, they sit on top of the largest aquifer in the county. That water is worth more than the land itself these days. With that cryptic warning, Dawson touched the brim of his hat and returned to his patrol car. Daniel quickly packed his belongings, checked out of the motel, and headed toward William's house. As he drove through the darkness, he realized just how complex this situation had become. This wasn't just about a family secret anymore. There were powerful interests at play, people willing to break into his room and potentially manipulate the law to get what they wanted. The safe deposit box had revealed one mystery only to deepen another. Why had Samuel kept those 40 acres separate all these years? What was so special about that particular piece of land beyond its historical significance to the family? And most importantly, what was Daniel supposed to do now? With the truth he'd uncovered, a truth that could change his family forever and potentially stop a multi-million-dollar development in its tracks. Samuel's words from the letter echoed in his mind. You know that land isn't just property. It's a story written over generations. Daniel was beginning to understand that he wasn't just inheriting a secret. He was inheriting a responsibility to that story and all the people connected to it, past and present. William Cooper's house was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the tension Daniel felt as he pulled into the driveway. The elderly lawyer welcomed him with a grave expression, ushering him inside where Sheriff Dawson was already waiting in the study. I think someone's been following me, Daniel said, as he settled into a worn leather armchair. I saw the same truck in my rearview mirror for most of the drive. Not surprising, Dawson replied. Blackwood's not the type to give up easily. William poured 3 glasses of whiskey, handing one to each of them. Tell us exactly what you found in the safe deposit box, Daniel. Daniel recounted the contents, the marriage certificate, birth records, adoption papers, trust fund documents, and most importantly, the deed to the 40 acres of original homestead property. Samuel legally separated that parcel from the main farm decades ago, he explained. According to the deed, it belongs to Sarah Miller, though she doesn't know about it. William nodded thoughtfully. Samuel set up that trust in 1975, shortly after his father passed. He was very deliberate about keeping it separate from the main property. Why, Bob? Daniel asked. What's so special about those 40 acres? Dawson mentioned something about an aquifer. The sheriff leaned forward. That land contains the headwaters of Cedar Creek. It sits directly above the largest clean aquifer in the region. Pioneer doesn't just want to build a resort, they want to control the water rights for the entire county. In drought years, whoever controls that water controls everything, William added. Samuel recognized that decades ago. It's why he legally separated that parcel from the main farm and put it in trust for Sarah. He knew someday someone would come along looking to buy the farm, and he wanted to make sure the heart of it, the water, couldn't be sold. But Eric is planning to sell the entire farm to Pioneer, Daniel said. He thinks he has the right to sell all 300 acres. That's because the trust and separate deed were never made public, William explained. Samuel didn't want to have to explain why he had set aside land for a daughter no one knew existed. The legal documents are valid, but they've been kept private all these years. Which means Eric is about to sell property he doesn't actually own, Daniel realized. And Blackwood knows it, which is why he was so interested in what was in that safe deposit box. Exactly, Dawson confirmed. Pioneer has already invested millions in preliminary work for this resort. If they discover now that 40 crucial acres aren't actually part of the deal, they'll be furious. And powerful companies like that don't take bad news well. That's why your room was searched, William added. They're looking for the documentation that could derail their entire project. Daniel sat back trying to process everything. So what am I supposed to do now? Contact Sarah. Tell her she owns 40 acres of prime Montana farmland. Tell my family they have a relative they've never met who's about to derail a multi-million-dollar sale. William placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Samuel believed you'd know what to do when the time came. That's why he left these breadcrumbs for you to follow. He trusted your judgment. But why me? Daniel asked. Why not tell my father or one of his siblings? Because you're the only one who ever truly listened when Samuel talked about the meaning of the farm, Dawson said simply. The others saw it as land, as an asset. You saw it the way Samuel did, as a legacy, a responsibility. The weight of that trust felt enormous. Daniel stared down at the documents spread across the table, the physical evidence of secrets kept for decades of choices made and paths not taken of a family history far more complex than he'd ever imagined. "I need to talk to Sarah," he finally said. "I need to understand who she is before I make any decisions about what to tell the family or how to handle the pioneer situation." William nodded approvingly. Samuel would agree with that approach. Take it one step at a time. "There's just one problem," Dawson interjected. "Eric and Blackwood won't sit idle while you sort this out. They're pushing to close this deal quickly. The town council is voting on the final zoning changes for the resort in less than a month." "Then I need to move quickly," Daniel said, gathering the documents. "Can I stay here tonight?" "William, I don't think it's safe to go back to town." "Of course. And tomorrow I think you should call Sarah. Start there." That night, Daniel lay awake in William's guest room, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The grandfather he'd idolized had lived a double life for decades. The farm he'd loved since childhood contained secrets he'd never suspected. And somewhere in California was a woman who shared his blood, but not his name, who had a right to part of his family's legacy. Samuel's words from their last conversation echoed in his mind. The most valuable things a man owns aren't always the things that show up on paper. Now Daniel understood what he'd meant. Samuel hadn't left him land or money in the will because he'd left him something far more valuable, the truth and the responsibility that came with it. As dawn broke over the Montana plains, Daniel made his decision. He would call Sarah today. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same courage Samuel had shown throughout his complicated life. Some legacies weren't measured in acres or dollars, but in the strength to do what was right, even when it was difficult. Sometimes the most precious inheritance wasn't something you could hold in your hands, but a truth that could change everything. Morning light streamed through the curtains as Daniel sat at William's kitchen table, phone in hand, Sarah Miller's number displayed on the screen. His finger hovered over the call button for several long moments before he finally pressed it. Each ring seemed to last an eternity. "Hello?" A woman's voice, warm and slightly cautious, answered. "Sarah Miller." "Yes, this is she." Daniel's mouth felt suddenly dry. "My name is Daniel Wilson. I'm Samuel Wilson's grandson. I believe he was your biological father." A long silence followed, and for a moment Daniel thought the connection had been lost. Then he heard a soft intake of breath. "I've been waiting for this call for 30 years, Daniel. I just didn't know which of Samuel's grandchildren would eventually make it." The calm certainty in her voice caught Daniel off guard. "You knew about us." "Of course, Samuel showed me pictures every time we met. He was so proud of all of you, especially you. He said you were the one who truly understood the farm." Daniel struggled to reconcile this reality with everything he believed about his grandfather. "We had no idea about you. I only found out 2 days ago." "I know," Sarah said gently. "That was our agreement, Samuel's, Eleanor's, and mine. We decided long ago that bringing our worlds together while they were still alive would only create unnecessary pain. Eleanor knew about you." Daniel's surprise grew with each revelation. "Since 1980, she found some of Samuel's letters from my adoptive parents. Instead of confronting him with anger, she reached out to me privately. We met once, just the two of us. She was an extraordinary woman, your grandmother." Daniel felt as if the foundations of his family history were shifting beneath him. "Why didn't they ever tell us?" "The longer a secret is kept, the harder it becomes to reveal," Sarah said. "By the time I found Samuel in the early 90s, he and Eleanor had built an entire life together. They had children who were adults, grandchildren they adored. Revealing my existence would have forced everyone to re-examine decades of family history." "So you and Samuel met in secret after Eleanor passed away in 2005. "Yes, a few times a year he would visit California supposedly to go fishing with old army buddies. We'd spend a few days together getting to know each other. It wasn't enough, but it was something." Daniel took a deep breath. "There's more to this situation than just family history. Samuel left 40 acres of the original homestead in trust for you. Land that my cousin Eric is currently trying to sell to a development company, not knowing it's legally yours." Now it was Sarah's turn to be surprised. "I had no idea Samuel had left me any part of the farm. He never mentioned it during our visits." "It's the original 40 acres where the family first settled. It includes the old homestead and the family cemetery. But it's also apparently sitting on top of the county's largest aquifer, which makes it extremely valuable." "I don't need the money, Daniel. I had a good career as a teacher, and my late husband left me well provided for. It's not just about money, Daniel explained. This development company Pioneer wants to build a luxury resort. They're pressuring the town with promises of jobs and tax revenue. But controlling that water could give them power over the entire region in the long term. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Samuel always said the heart of the farm was where the water came from, that his grandfather chose that specific spot to build because he understood water was more valuable than gold in farming country. There's something else, Daniel said, deciding to share everything. Your granddaughter Olivia, she's studying at Montana State University. Yes, she's in her final year of sustainable agriculture. How did you know about Olivia Atuenda? I found a letter you wrote to Samuel mentioning her. She doesn't know about her connection to our family. No, I've respected Samuel's wishes about keeping these worlds separate. Olivia knows she was adopted into the Miller family, but she doesn't know her biological great-grandfather was a Montana farmer named Samuel Wilson. Daniel considered his next words carefully. I'd like to meet her, if that's possible, without revealing our connection yet. She might have insights about the land that could help. Her studies in sustainable agriculture could be valuable in finding an alternative to selling to Pioneer. She'd love to talk about sustainable farming practices, Sarah said with a laugh. It's practically all she talks about these days. I could call her, say an old family friend's grandson is interested in her research. That would be perfect. Daniel, Sarah's voice grew serious. What are you planning to do about all this? About the family, secret, the land, everything? I'm not entirely sure yet, he admitted, but I know I need to understand all the pieces before I make any decisions. Meeting Olivia is part of that. I also need to figure out how to approach my family with this information. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm not looking to disrupt anyone's life or claim anything that isn't mine. Samuel and I made our peace with our unusual relationship. I'm just grateful to finally speak with someone else in the family. After they finished their call, Daniel sat staring at the phone, processing everything Sarah had shared. The story was even more complex than he'd imagined. Not only had Samuel maintained this secret relationship for decades, but Eleanor had known and apparently accepted it, creating an elaborate fiction that had protected both families from painful truths. William entered the kitchen and poured himself coffee. How did it go? It's complicated, Daniel said, explaining what he'd learned from Sarah. I'm going to meet her granddaughter Olivia at the university today. Sarah is calling her now to set it up. Good first step, William nodded approvingly. But be careful. Eric might be having you followed. I thought of that. I'm going to take back roads to Bozeman just to be safe. Daniel spent the 2-hour drive to Montana State University rehearsing what he would say to Olivia. How much could he share without revealing their family connection? How could he gain her trust and insights without feeling like he was manipulating her? The agricultural campus was bustling with activity when he arrived. Students moved between modern glass buildings and experimental growing fields where research crops grew in neat rows. Daniel followed Sarah's directions to the Sustainable Agriculture building where Olivia would be finishing a lab session. He spotted her immediately as she exited the building, recognizing her from the description Sarah had provided. Olivia Miller was in her early 20s with light brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore the jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, practical clothes for someone who worked with soil and plants. But what struck Daniel most was her confident stride and the animated way she spoke to the classmates walking beside her. Olivia, he called as he approached. She turned curious. You must be Daniel. Grandma Sarah called about you. She extended her hand, her grip firm and assured. Thanks for making time to meet me. No problem. She said you were interested in sustainable practices for family farms. That's basically my obsession. Her smile was open and genuine. They walked to a campus cafe where Olivia immediately launched into passionate explanations of her research, while Daniel listened fascinated not just by the content but by her enthusiasm. Most people don't understand that soil isn't just dirt, she explained, sketching diagrams on a napkin. It's a living ecosystem. Industrial farming treats it like an inert medium, but traditional family farms often develop practices that naturally preserve soil health without even realizing the science behind it. My grandfather was obsessive about crop rotation and letting fields rest, Daniel said. Smart man. Olivia nodded approvingly. Those older farmers often had generational knowledge that science is only now catching up to. They understood their specific land in ways no textbook could teach. As Olivia continued explaining her research on water conservation and natural pest management, Daniel was struck by how much she reminded him of Samuel. The same thoughtful consideration, the same reverence for the land and its processes. I'm actually working on a case study about integrating tourism with sustainable farming. Olivia mentioned creating experience where people can connect with food sources while generating additional revenue for family farms. Daniel leaned forward suddenly, very interested. What kinds of experiences? Farm-to-table dining educational programs, even luxury accommodations in converted farm buildings. People will pay premium prices for authentic rural experiences if they're done well. It creates a revenue stream that doesn't depend entirely on crop yields and market prices. That sounds like it could be a viable alternative to selling farmland for development, Daniel suggested. Olivia's expression darkened. Absolutely. I've seen too many family farms sold off for subdivisions or commercial development. Once that agricultural heritage is gone, it's gone forever. What if, Daniel said carefully, you had a chance to apply these ideas to a real farm, a historic property that's at risk of being sold to developers? Olivia's eyes lit up. I'd love that opportunity. My thesis project requires a real-world application component. The farm I'm thinking of is about 300 acres in Riverdale County, been in the same family for 4 generations. It has historic buildings, antique farm equipment, and importantly, its own water source. Sounds ideal, Olivia said. Is this your family's farm? Daniel nodded. My grandfather passed away recently. My cousin inherited most of it and is considering selling to a resort developer. That's a shame, Olivia said, genuine disappointment in her voice. Farms with that kind of history should be preserved if possible. The most valuable part might be 40 acres that contain the original homestead and the farm's water source, Daniel continued. It sits on top of a significant aquifer. Olivia's expression became more serious. Water rights are becoming the most valuable asset in agricultural communities, especially with climate change. Whoever controls water essentially controls the future of the surrounding area. For the next hour, Olivia outlined how a historic farm could be transformed into a sustainable agricultural center with educational programs, tourism components, and working demonstration fields. Her vision was practical yet innovative, preserving the essential character of the farm while making it economically viable. This isn't just theory, she insisted. There are successful models of this approach throughout the Midwest. With the right business plan and perhaps some grant funding for the historical preservation aspects, it could work. Daniel was impressed not just by her knowledge, but by her practical approach. This wasn't naive idealism. Olivia understood the economic realities facing family farms and had developed workable solutions. As their conversation wound down, Daniel found himself wanting to tell her everything: their family connection, Samuel's secret, the complicated situation with the land trust. But he held back, knowing it wasn't his place to upend her understanding of her family history without consulting Sarah first. Would you be interested in seeing the farm sometime? He asked instead. Your expertise could be valuable in developing an alternative proposal to counter the resort plan. I'd love that, Olivia said enthusiastically. My schedule is flexible on weekends. Great, I'll be in touch once I've had some conversations with family members. As they parted ways, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. Olivia's vision for the farm aligned perfectly with what he believed Samuel would have wanted: preservation of the family legacy while adapting to modern realities. It wasn't just about stopping pioneers' development. It was about creating something meaningful that honored the past while securing the future. Driving back to Riverdale, Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. If he could persuade Eric that Olivia's approach offered long-term sustainability rather than a one-time payout, perhaps there was a path forward that benefited everyone. But first, he needed to address the legal reality of the 40 acres that belonged to Sarah. When he returned to William's house, he found Sheriff Dawson waiting with William in the kitchen, both men looking concerned. What's happened? Daniel asked immediately. Blackwood's been asking questions all over town about you, Dawson said, and Eric filed a police report claiming you removed valuable family heirlooms from the farm without permission. The antique plow, Daniel guessed. Among other things, it's a civil matter, not criminal, but it shows they're getting aggressive. There's more, William added grimly. The town council moved up the vote on Pioneer's zoning request. It's now scheduled for next Monday, just 5 days from now. That's not much time, Daniel said, sinking into a chair. I need to talk to Eric, making him understand what's really going on. Be careful, Dawson warned. Eric's heavily leveraged. He took out loans to modernize his portion of the farm, counting on this pioneer deal to bail him out. He's desperate, and desperate people are unpredictable. I need to see the 40 acres, Daniel decided. I've been so focused on the documents and the legal aspects that I haven't actually seen the land Samuel set aside for Sarah. I need to understand exactly what we're fighting for. I'll take you at first light tomorrow, William offered. I know a back way onto the property. We can avoid the main farm entrance where Eric might spot us. That night, Daniel called Sarah again to update her on his meeting with Olivia. She's remarkable, he told Sarah. Brilliant, passionate, practical. She reminds me so much of Samuel. Yes, that's what he always said too, Sarah replied, her voice warm with pride. Did you tell her about your connection? No, I thought that should come from you when you're ready, but she has amazing ideas for the farm ways to preserve it while making it economically viable. That sounds like exactly what Samuel would have wanted. I'm going to see the 40 acres tomorrow, Daniel continued, the land that's legally yours. Then I'm going to try to talk to Eric, make him understand the situation. Be gentle with him, Sarah advised. Finding out your family history isn't what you thought can be deeply disorienting. I'll try, Daniel promised, but time is running short. The town council votes on Pioneer's zoning request in 5 days. Do what you need to do, Daniel. I trust your judgment. Samuel did too, or he wouldn't have left you these breadcrumbs to follow. The next morning, William drove Daniel to the edges of the Wilson farm property, taking winding back roads until they reached a small, unmarked dirt track that led into a wooded area. This was an old service road Samuel maintained, William explained as they bumped along in his aging pickup. Leads directly to the original homestead without crossing the main fields. The track emerged from the trees onto a gentle rise, overlooking a picture-perfect valley. A small creek wound through the center, its banks lined with ancient cottonwood trees. Near the creek stood a weathered 2-story farmhouse, its wooden siding silvered with age, but its structure still sound. A stone barn and several smaller outbuildings clustered nearby, creating a natural courtyard. The original Wilson homestead, William said unnecessarily as they parked near the house. Built in 1890 by Samuel's grandfather. The family lived here until 1945 when they built the main house where you visited Samuel. Daniel stepped out of the truck feeling a strange sense of connection to this place he'd never visited. Samuel had mentioned the old homestead occasionally, but had never brought Daniel here during their many explorations of the farm. Why did he keep this place separate, Daniel wondered aloud, even before the legal trust for Sarah? Samuel always said this was the heart of the farm, William replied, where everything began. He didn't want it absorbed into the larger operation or modernized. He preserved it exactly as his grandfather had built it. They walked around the property, William pointing out features that made these 40 acres so special: the natural spring that fed the creek, the fertile bottomland along the water, the protected southern exposure that created a natural microclimate. The aquifer comes closest to the surface here, William explained, indicating the spring. Pure, clean groundwater that's been filtering through limestone for centuries. It feeds not just this creek, but eventually joins the watershed that supplies the entire county. Inside the old farmhouse, Daniel was surprised to find it furnished and maintained, albeit in a simple rustic style. It wasn't a museum piece, but a functional home that had been preserved with care. Samuel came here often, William said, noting Daniel's surprise. Said he could think more clearly here than anywhere else, sometimes stayed for days when he had important decisions to make. In what had clearly been Samuel's study, Daniel found bookshelves filled with agricultural journals, history books, and family albums. On the desk sat a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Samuel's distinctive handwriting, observations about the farm, weather patterns, wildlife sightings, and personal reflections stretching back decades. The final entry, dated just weeks before Samuel's death, caught Daniel's eye. Walked the creek line this morning, water running clear and strong despite the dry summer. This land has always provided even in difficult times. I hope whoever comes after me will understand what we have here. Not just soil and water, but a legacy of stewardship. Some things are worth more than money, worth fighting to preserve for those who will come long after we're gone. I've done what I can to protect this place. Now I must trust that the right person will find the path I've left and have the courage to follow it. Daniel closed the journal more certain than ever that Samuel had intended him to find the hidden key to discover Sarah, to understand the true value of these 40 acres. This wasn't just about family secrets or legal ownership. It was about protecting something precious that Samuel had preserved for future generations. I need to show this place to Olivia, Daniel said suddenly. She needs to see what we're trying to save. And Eric, William added, he needs to understand what he's really selling. Can you get Olivia here tomorrow? Daniel asked. I'm going to talk to Eric today. Try to make him understand the legal reality of the situation. But whether he accepts it or not, I want Olivia to see this place to help us figure out how to protect it. William nodded. I'll call Sarah, arrange for Olivia to drive out. What about the rest of your family? Your father, the other cousins? Daniel considered this. Not yet. First Eric, then Olivia, one step at a time. They drove back to Riverdale so Daniel could borrow William's car for the drive to Eric's house. Eric had built a modern home on the edge of town 5 years earlier, part of his effort to separate his identity from the farm while still managing his portion of it. As Daniel pulled into the driveway, he saw Eric's truck parked outside, confirming he was home. Taking a deep breath, Daniel approached the front door and rang the bell. Eric opened it, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness when he saw Daniel. Didn't expect to see you. Heard you've been asking a lot of questions around town. We need to talk, Eric, about the farm, about Samuel, about things neither of us knew. Eric hesitated, then stepped back. Come in, but if this is some attempt to derail the Pioneer deal, you're wasting your time. The contracts are already drawn up. Inside Eric's house was sparsely furnished with moving boxes stacked in corners. Daniel noticed a for sale sign leaning against the wall, not yet placed in the yard. Planning to move? Daniel asked. Eric shrugged uncomfortably. The Pioneer deal includes a position for me managing their agricultural tourism programs. They're setting me up with housing near the resort. Sounds like they've got everything planned out, Daniel observed. It's a good deal, Dan. Better than watching the farm slowly fail year after year. Eric's voice held a defensive edge. Not everyone can afford to indulge in nostalgia about the good old days. This isn't about nostalgia, Daniel said evenly. It's about facts you don't have. Legal facts that affect the sale you're trying to make. Eric's expression hardened. What are you talking about? Samuel left 40 acres of the original homestead in a separate trust. It's not legally part of the property you inherited. That's ridiculous. The entire 300 acres was listed in the estate inventory. No, Eric. 260 acres were in the estate. The original 40 acres around the old homestead were placed in a separate trust decades ago. I've seen the legal documents. Eric's face flushed with anger. If this is some trick to try to claim a part of the farm for yourself, it's not for me, Daniel interrupted. Samuel left those 40 acres to someone else, someone the family doesn't know about. What are you talking about? Who? Daniel took a deep breath. Samuel had another family before he met Grandma Eleanor, a wife named Margaret, who died in 1956, and a daughter named Sarah, who was raised by her grandparents. Eric stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible. Grandpa would have told us something that important. I thought so too, but I've seen the marriage certificate, the birth certificate, photographs, letters spanning 60 years. Sarah Miller is Samuel's daughter, and he left the original 40 acres of the farm to her in a legal trust established decades ago. Eric sank into a chair, the color draining from his face. This can't be happening. The Pioneer deal closes next week. They've already invested millions in preliminary work. The deal can't include land Samuel didn't legally own, Daniel said gently. And that's not all. Those 40 acres contain the main water source for the entire property, the aquifer access point. Without water rights to that section, the resort plan isn't viable. Why are you doing this? Eric demanded, anger replacing shock. Why dig up ancient history and ruin everything? I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm trying to honor Samuel's wishes and protect the farm he loved. There are alternatives to selling to Pioneer. Like what? The farm loses money every year. The equipment is outdated. The infrastructure needs massive investment. Where is that money supposed to come from? I met Sarah's granddaughter, Olivia. She's studying sustainable agriculture at the university. She has innovative ideas for making the farm economically viable while preserving its character. Eric laughed bitterly. So now some college student I've never met is going to save the family farm with theories and good intentions. That's not how the real world works, Dan. It's not just theories. She's developed practical approaches that have worked for other historic farms. Combining traditional agriculture with tourism education, farm-to-table dining experiences. And this magical transformation requires what kind of initial investment? Daniel hesitated. I don't have specific numbers yet, but the 40 acres in Sarah's trust could be the cornerstone of the project. The historic buildings, the water source, the original homestead, these are assets that could qualify for preservation grants and cultural tourism funding. Eric stood and paced the room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. You don't understand my situation, Dan. I'm leveraged to the hilt. I borrowed heavily to modernize my operation, and those loans are coming due. Without the pioneer money, I could lose everything. Not just the farm, but this house, my savings, everything. For the first time, Daniel understood the depth of Eric's financial desperation. This wasn't just about selling family history for profit. It was about survival. Let me bring Olivia out to the farm tomorrow, Daniel suggested. Let her see the place. Develop a proper proposal. If it's not viable, we'll know soon enough. But at least give this alternative a chance before committing to Pioneer. Eric looked skeptical. And what about this Sarah person, Samuel's secret daughter? Is she going to swoop in and claim her 40 acres, breaking up the farm that's been in our family for generations? Sarah isn't looking to disrupt anyone's life. She didn't even know Samuel had left her the land until I told her. But legally, those acres are hers. We need to work with that reality, not against it. After a long moment, Eric nodded reluctantly. Fine, bring your agriculture student out tomorrow, but I'm not making any promises and I'm not canceling my meeting with Pioneer. They need to know about this complication. Fair enough, Daniel agreed, relieved to have gained at least a small concession. And Eric, there's one more thing you should know. Sarah is coming to town next week. I think you should meet her. She's family whether we knew about her or not. One revelation at a time, Dan, Eric said wearily. Let me process the fact that Grandpa had a secret daughter before you start planning family reunions. As Daniel drove back to Williams, he reflected on the complexity of the situation. Eric's financial predicament added another layer of urgency to finding a viable alternative to the Pioneer development. It wasn't enough to simply block the sale. They needed a solution that addressed the economic realities facing the farm. He called Sarah to update her on his conversation with Eric and his visit to the 40 acres. It's beautiful, Sarah. Peaceful in a way that's hard to describe. I can see why Samuel wanted to preserve it exactly as it was. He sent me pictures over the years, Sarah said, but I've never seen it in person. That will change soon, I suppose. Are you still planning to come next week? Yes, I booked a flight for Sunday. Olivia doesn't know I'm coming. I thought it might be time to tell her the truth about her connection to the Wilson family. How do you think she'll react? Sarah sighed. Olivia has always known she was adopted into the Miller family. She's been curious about her biological roots, but respectful of privacy. I think she'll be surprised, but ultimately pleased to discover this connection to the land she loves so much. I'm bringing her to see the 40 acres tomorrow, Daniel said. William is arranging it. I won't tell her about your relationship to our family. That should come from you. But I want her to see the place to understand what we're trying to protect. Thank you, Daniel, for everything you're doing. Samuel was right to trust you with this. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the journal he'd found in the old farmhouse, about Samuel's final entry with its references to stewardship and courage. Had Samuel known even then how complicated this situation would become? Had he anticipated the conflict between preservation and economic necessity that now faced the family? In the darkness, Daniel remembered something Samuel had often said when teaching him about farming. The land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land. We're just caretakers for a little while, responsible for passing it on better than we found it. That philosophy had guided Samuel throughout his life. It had probably informed his decision to legally protect the original 40 acres, ensuring they couldn't be sold or developed. And now it was up to Daniel to honor that vision while finding a path forward that served the needs of the present. As dawn broke over the Montana plains, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. Today he would show Olivia the heart of the Wilson farm. Together, perhaps they could find a way to preserve Samuel's legacy while creating a sustainable future for the land he had loved so deeply. The solution wouldn't be simple or easy. It would require bridging gaps between family members who didn't yet know they were related. It would mean finding economic models that serve present needs without sacrificing future possibilities. And it would demand confronting powerful interests who saw land only as a commodity to be exploited for maximum profit. But as the first rays of sunlight painted the eastern sky, Daniel felt certain of one thing: Samuel had left him this challenge because he believed Daniel was equal to it. The key to the safe deposit box had unlocked far more than family secrets. It had opened the door to a responsibility that would shape not just Daniel's future, but the future of the land and all those connected to it for generations to come. Some inheritances couldn't be measured in acres or dollars. Some legacies weren't written in wills, but encoded in the choices we make and the values we uphold. As Daniel prepared for the day ahead, he understood that Samuel's true bequest hadn't been property or money, but something far more valuable: the chance to make a difference that would outlast his own lifetime. Morning mist hung over the old homestead as Daniel waited for Olivia to arrive. The early September air carried the first hints of autumn, a crispness that promised change. William had gone to meet Olivia at the main road, guiding her to this hidden corner of the Wilson farm that few outside the family had ever seen. Daniel wandered through the dew-soaked grass, stopping at the edge of the creek where the water bubbled clear and cold over smooth stones. This place had a timelessness about it, as if the concerns of the modern world couldn't quite penetrate here. He understood now why Samuel had preserved it so carefully, keeping it separate both legally and spiritually from the working farm. The sound of tires on the gravel track announced their arrival. Olivia stepped out of her practical, compact car, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. She wore work boots, jeans, and a university sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dressed for a day of exploring, not theorizing. "This is incredible," she said, turning slowly to absorb the landscape. "You didn't mention it was this beautiful." "Words don't really do it justice," Daniel admitted. "It has to be experienced." For the next hour, they walked the property together. Daniel showed her the spring where groundwater bubbled to the surface, the old orchard with heritage apple varieties, the stone barn with its hand-hewn beams, and finally the farmhouse itself. Olivia didn't just look. She observed with a trained eye, asking questions about soil quality, water flow patterns, and growing seasons. Inside the farmhouse, Olivia ran her hands along the well-worn wooden countertops in the kitchen. "This place feels lived in, not like a museum. Someone has been caring for it." "My grandfather spent a lot of time here," Daniel explained. "It was his retreat, I think, a place to connect with the past." "This is exactly the kind of property people would pay to experience," Olivia said, excitement building in her voice. "Authentic, historical, with a story to tell. And those springs, do you realize how valuable that water source is becoming in today's climate? Valuable enough that Pioneer Development wants to control it for their resort," Daniel confirmed. Olivia's expression grew serious. "Water is the new gold, especially in agricultural regions. Whoever controls water rights controls the future." They settled at the kitchen table where Daniel had laid out maps of the property and the surrounding area. Olivia quickly oriented herself, identifying key features and making notes in a small notebook she carried. "The 40 acres you mentioned, is this it?" she asked, tracing a boundary on the map. Daniel nodded. "The original homestead parcel. The rest of the farm was added later, piece by piece. And this parcel is owned separately from the main farm by someone named Sarah Miller." "Yes, it's a complicated situation," Daniel said carefully, remembering his promise not to reveal their family connection. "She inherited it from my grandfather, but the arrangement was kept private for many years." Olivia studied the maps intently. "This changes everything about the potential development. Without access to this water source, the resort would need to drill deep wells or run pipelines from town. Expensive and environmentally problematic. Which is why I need your help creating an alternative," Daniel explained. "My cousin Eric is in financial trouble. He needs the Pioneer deal to pay off debts. But selling to them would destroy everything my grandfather worked to preserve." "Let me show you what I'm thinking," Olivia said, flipping to a clean page in her notebook. For the next hour, she sketched and explained her vision for transforming the Wilson farm into what she called an agricultural heritage center, a working farm that combined traditional practices with modern sustainable techniques while also offering educational programs, farm stays, and authentic rural experiences. The old homestead becomes the centerpiece, she explained, restored but not modernized, a place where people can disconnect from technology and reconnect with the rhythms of rural life. The main farm continues production, but transitions toward organic practices and heritage crops that command premium prices. And this generates enough income to be viable, Daniel asked. It can, with the right business model, farm-to-table dinners, workshops on traditional skills, seasonal festivals, agricultural tourism. These aren't just trendy concepts. They're creating sustainable revenue for family farms across the country. Olivia's passion was infectious, her knowledge impressive. She clearly thought deeply about these issues, researched successful models, and developed practical approaches that addressed both economic and environmental considerations. The investment required would be significant, she acknowledged. But there are grants available for historic preservation, sustainable agriculture initiatives, and rural economic development. With the property's history and water resources, it would qualify for several programs. What about Eric's immediate financial needs? Daniel asked. He's facing foreclosure if he can't pay off his loan soon. Olivia considered this. The most valuable asset here is the water rights. There might be ways to monetize those without selling them outright. Conservation easements and water banking programs, these could generate upfront capital while maintaining long-term control. As she continued outlining potential approaches, Daniel found himself impressed not just by her knowledge, but by her practical mindset. This wasn't idealistic dreaming. It was a thoughtful strategy grounded in real-world examples and financial considerations. I'd need to develop a proper business plan, Olivia concluded. Run the numbers, identify potential funding sources, create phased implementation timelines, but based on what I've seen today, I believe there's a viable alternative to selling to Pioneer. Daniel felt a surge of hope. How quickly could you pull that together? This town council votes on Pioneer's zoning request in 4 days. I can have preliminary projections by tomorrow, Olivia said. Not a complete business plan, but enough to show the concept is financially sound. I have models from my research that we can adapt to this specific property. That would be incredible, Daniel said gratefully. Eric has agreed to hear us out, but he's skeptical. Having concrete numbers would make a huge difference. As they continued discussing possibilities, William returned from town with troubling news. Blackwood from the bank is mobilizing support for the Pioneer project. He reported calling in favors with town council members promising economic benefits. He's also spreading rumors that you're trying to block progress for selfish reasons. What kind of rumors? Daniel asked. That you're bitter about being left out of the will, that you're trying to sabotage Eric's inheritance out of jealousy. Daniel sighed. Not surprising, I guess. Anything else? Sheriff Dawson says Pioneer representatives have been meeting with county officials discussing potential eminent domain actions if the zoning change is approved, but water access becomes an issue. They can't seize private property just for a resort, Olivia protested. They can if they convince officials it serves the public good through economic development, William explained. It's been done before in other communities. Not easy, but possible with enough political pressure and legal maneuvering. This new threat added urgency to their planning. If Pioneer was already exploring eminent domain options, they clearly recognized the critical importance of the 40 acres and were prepared to fight for them through any means necessary. We need to move quickly, Daniel decided. Olivia, how soon can you start on those projections? I'll begin right away, she said. I can work here if that's okay. The setting will help me visualize the possibilities. Perfect. I need to update Sarah on these developments and then meet with Eric again. He needs to understand what we're up against. After Olivia settled in at the farmhouse kitchen table with her laptop and notes, Daniel stepped outside to call Sarah. Pioneer is playing hardball, he explained after updating her on the morning's events. They're exploring eminent domain options if they can't buy the water rights directly. Can they really do that? Sarah asked, concerned. It would be difficult, but not impossible. Small towns desperate for economic development have been known to use aggressive tactics. What can I do to help from here? Should I come sooner? Actually, yes, Daniel decided. Having you here physically would strengthen our position. If you could fly in tomorrow instead of Sunday, We could present a united front at the town council meeting. I'll change my flight, Sarah agreed. And Daniel, I think it's time to tell Olivia the truth about our family connection. If she's going to be advocating for this land, she should know her personal stake in it. Are you sure that should come from you? I'll tell her when I arrive tomorrow. Some truths are better delivered in person. After ending the call, Daniel drove to Eric's house, hoping to find him more receptive after having time to process yesterday's revelations. Instead, he found Eric packing boxes, his movements angry and hurried. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here," Eric said when Daniel entered. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Pioneer is threatening to pull out of the deal entirely because of the uncertainty around the water rights." "Eric, we need to talk about—" "No, you need to listen," Eric interrupted. "I just got off the phone with the bank. If this deal falls through, they're initiating foreclosure proceedings next week. Everything I've worked for gone. And for what? So you can play hero and save Grandpa's precious legacy." Daniel took a deep breath, reminding himself that Eric's anger came from fear. "I understand you're in a difficult position. That's why I'm here. Olivia is working on financial projections for an alternative approach that could address your immediate needs while preserving the farm. More fairy tales about farm-to-table dinners and city folks paying to collect eggs. It's not a fairy tale. It's a business model that's working for farms across the country, and there may be ways to monetize the water rights without selling them outright." Eric's skepticism was evident, but financial desperation made him willing to listen. Daniel outlined Olivia's preliminary ideas, emphasizing the potential for immediate capital through conservation easements and grant programs. "And who exactly is this Olivia person?" Eric asked. "Why is she so invested in saving our family farm?" Daniel hesitated, respecting Sarah's wish to reveal their relationship herself. "She's a graduate student in sustainable agriculture. This is her area of expertise, and she's passionate about preserving family farms and agricultural heritage. She's using this as a case study for her thesis project." Eric seemed unconvinced, but too exhausted to argue further. "Fine. When will these magical financial projections be ready?" "Tomorrow, and Sarah Miller is also flying in tomorrow. I think you should meet her, Eric. Hear her perspective on this situation." "Samuel's secret daughter," Eric said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I still can't wrap my mind around it. Why wouldn't he tell us?" "I think he was trying to protect everyone, Sarah, Eleanor, the family here. The longer he kept the secret, the harder it became to reveal." Eric sat heavily on a packing box. "Did you know Blackwood called me this morning? Said if I could get Sarah to sign away her rights to those 40 acres, Pioneer would not only proceed with the deal, but increase their offer by $2 million. "And what did you tell him?" "That I couldn't speak for Sarah since I've never even met her." Eric looked up at Daniel. "I'm not a villain in this story, Dan. I'm just trying to save what I can." "I know that," Daniel said gently, "and I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Will you at least look at Olivia's projections before making any final decisions?" Eric nodded reluctantly. "I'll look. That's all I can promise." As Daniel drove back to the old homestead, he reflected on the complexity of the situation. Eric wasn't wrong to prioritize his financial survival. Samuel had put them all in an impossible position by keeping his secrets for so long. And now they had just days to find a path forward that honored both the past and the present needs of the family. When he arrived, he found Olivia still working intently at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and digital maps displayed on her laptop screen. "The more I analyze this property, the more extraordinary it becomes," she said without looking up. "The water quality from those springs is remarkable. Lab tests from the university's watershed project show it's among the purest in the state. That's why Pioneer wants it so badly," Daniel noted. "It's not just for the resort's immediate needs," Olivia explained. "Long-term climate projections show this region facing increased drought cycles. Whoever controls these water rights essentially controls the future development potential for the entire watershed." This revelation made the stakes even higher. If Pioneer secured these water rights, they could potentially control not just their resort, but the surrounding agricultural community as well. "I've been running various financial scenarios," Olivia continued. "The most promising approach combines immediate revenue generation through conservation easements with phased development of tourism and educational components." She showed Daniel spreadsheets detailing potential income streams, startup costs, and funding sources. The numbers were encouraging, not a quick fix, but a sustainable long-term approach that could begin generating revenue within months while preserving the property's essential character. The conservation easement alone could provide enough upfront capital to address Eric's immediate debt issues. Olivia pointed out several foundations that would jump at the chance to protect a water source this significant. As evening approached, William returned with dinner and news from town. The community was divided over the Pioneer Project, with business owners generally supporting it, while longtime farming families expressed concerns about water access and changing community character. The vote will be close, William predicted. 4 council members leaned toward approval, 3 against, with 2 undecided. If we can sway just one of the undecideds, we might be able to delay the decision and force more thorough environmental impact studies. They discussed strategy late into the night, identifying key stakeholders and preparing arguments for the council meeting. Olivia's academic background provided scientific credibility, while William's deep community connections offered practical political insights. When they finally turned in for the night, Daniel found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing with all they'd learned and the challenges still ahead. He stepped outside onto the porch of the old farmhouse, gazing up at stars that seemed impossibly bright away from city lights. The magnitude of what Samuel had entrusted to him felt overwhelming. This wasn't just about family secrets or property rights. It was about the future of the land itself and all the people connected to it. Water life, community heritage, all hanging in the balance of decisions that would be made in the coming days. Daniel remembered the final entry in Samuel's journal. "I've done what I can to protect this place. Now I must trust that the right person will find the path I've left and have the courage to follow it." Was he that person? Did he have the wisdom and courage to navigate these troubled waters? As doubts crept in, Daniel heard the screen door open behind him. "Couldn't sleep either," Olivia asked, stepping onto the porch with a steaming mug in her hands. "Too much at stake," Daniel admitted. "I know what you mean. This place gets under your skin, doesn't it? I've only been here a day, and already I feel connected to it somehow." If only she knew how true that was, Daniel thought, remembering that Olivia would soon learn of her direct family connection to this land. "My grandfather used to say that land has memory." Daniel said that it remembers those who cared for it and those who didn't. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. Indigenous cultures have understood that for centuries. We're just starting to catch up, scientifically recognizing that ecosystems retain imprints of how they've been treated. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle burbling of the creek and the rustle of wind through cottonwood leaves. "Why is this place so important to you?" Olivia finally asked. "Beyond family history, I mean." Daniel considered the question carefully. "I think because it represents something authentic in a world that increasingly isn't. This farm has integrity. Every building, every field, every tree is here for a reason, serves a purpose, has a story. Samuel understood that, protected it fiercely. And now that responsibility has passed to you," Olivia observed. "Not just to me," Daniel said. "To all of us who understand what's at stake. Some things once lost can never be recovered." Dawn was breaking when they finally returned inside the eastern sky painted in strokes of pink and gold. A new day was beginning, one that would bring Sarah's arrival, and with it revelations that would forever change Olivia's understanding of her connection to this land. As Daniel prepared coffee in the old farmhouse kitchen, he felt a strange sense of calm despite the challenges ahead. Samuel had trusted him to find a way forward, and together with Olivia and Sarah, perhaps they would. The kitchen filled with morning light as Olivia resumed her work on the financial projections, her dedication unwavering. Daniel watched her for a moment, struck by how naturally she fit into this place, as if she'd always belonged here. Soon she would learn that in a very real sense she did. Some legacies weren't measured in acres or dollars, but in the connections they forged between people and places, past and future. As the morning sun illuminated the old homestead, Daniel understood that the true inheritance Samuel had left wasn't just the land itself, but the responsibility to protect what made it special, not just for their family, but for all who would come after them. By midday, Olivia had completed her preliminary financial analysis. The numbers were promising, not a guaranteed solution, but a viable alternative to selling to Pioneer. Conservation easements could provide immediate capital to address Eric's debt while preserving long-term control of the water rights. Phased development of agricultural tourism components could create sustainable revenue streams within 12 to 18 months. It's not a quick fix, Olivia acknowledged, but it's economically viable while preserving the character and integrity of the property. As they reviewed the projections, William arrived with news that Sarah's flight had landed. He would pick her up and bring her directly to the homestead. "Are you ready for this?" Daniel asked Olivia. "Sarah may have some important information to share with you about your connection to this place." Olivia looked puzzled. "My connection, I only learned about this farm yesterday." "Some connections run deeper than we realize," Daniel said enigmatically. "I think you should hear what she has to say with an open mind." The anticipation of Sarah's arrival and the revelations it would bring added an emotional weight to the already complex situation. Soon Olivia would learn that her work to save the Wilson farm wasn't just an academic exercise or professional challenge. It was part of her own family legacy, a heritage she hadn't known was hers to claim. As they waited, Daniel stepped outside, scanning the horizon where the gravel road disappeared into distant trees. Soon Sarah would arrive, bringing with her the final pieces of a puzzle that had remained incomplete for over 60 years. Whatever happened next would reshape not just the future of the land, but the understanding of family itself for all of them. The gravel crunched under tires as William's truck wound its way up the long drive to the homestead. Daniel stood on the porch watching as the vehicle came to a stop and two figures emerged, William and a woman in her late 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and a dignified bearing that immediately reminded him of Samuel. Sarah Miller paused as she took in the surroundings, her hand rising to her mouth in a gesture of quiet emotion. For 60 years, she had known about this place only through photographs and stories. Now she was standing on the land where her father had been born, where her grandfather had built a life, where her own roots ran deep beneath soil she had never walked upon until this moment. "It's exactly as he described it," she said softly as Daniel approached. "The cottonwoods by the creek, the slope of the hill, the way the morning light hits the barn. I've seen it in photographs all my life, but being here—" Daniel extended his hand, but Sarah pulled him into a gentle embrace instead. "Samuel's grandson," she said, studying his face. "He was right. You have his eyes, that same way of looking at things as if you're seeing more than what's on the surface." "Welcome home," Daniel said simply, the words carrying more weight than he had intended. Inside the farmhouse, Olivia looked up from her work at the kitchen table, curious about the new arrival. When Sarah entered, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition neither could quite name, but both clearly felt. "Olivia," Sarah said warmly, "it's wonderful to see you here." "You two know each other?" Daniel asked, though he knew the answer. "Sarah is my grandmother," Olivia explained, rising to embrace the older woman. "She called last night to say she was coming, but I had no idea it would be here. I thought she was just interested in my thesis project." "There's a reason for that," Sarah said, her voice steady but threaded with emotion. "We have much to talk about, dear." William discreetly suggested he and Daniel check on some repairs needed in the barn, giving the women privacy for what would surely be a life-changing conversation. As they walked across the yard, Daniel glanced back at the farmhouse, imagining the scene unfolding inside, Sarah revealing to Olivia the truth about Samuel Wilson, about her biological heritage, about her connection to this very land. "Samuel would be pleased," William remarked. "3 generations of his family together on the original homestead. Never thought I'd live to see it." "Do you think Olivia will be upset finding out her family history isn't what she thought?" Daniel asked. William considered this. She's Samuel's granddaughter, whether she knew it or not. That same practical resilience runs in her blood. She'll be surprised, maybe even shocked at first, but she'll find her footing. In the barn, they busied themselves with minor repairs, giving Sarah and Olivia the time they needed. William showed Daniel where Samuel had meticulously maintained the antique farm equipment, preserving not just the items themselves, but the knowledge of how to use them. "Most folks these days don't understand the value of knowing how things work," William said, running his hand along the wooden handle of an old hay fork. "Samuel believed that understanding the tools of the past gave you perspective on the present. That's something he passed on to you." "And apparently to Olivia, though he couldn't claim credit directly," Daniel observed. "Her whole academic focus is on integrating traditional farming knowledge with modern sustainable practices." "Blood calls to blood," William nodded. "Some connections don't need words to take root." Nearly an hour passed before the farmhouse door opened and the two women emerged. Olivia's eyes were reddened, but her expression was one of wonder rather than distress. She walked directly to Daniel, studying him with new awareness. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. It wasn't my story to tell, he answered honestly. Sarah needed to be the one. Olivia nodded, accepting this. So we're cousins, second cousins, something like that. Daniel smiled. Family anyway. Family, Olivia repeated, testing the word. I always knew I was adopted into the Miller family. I just never imagined, she gestured to the land around them, that I had roots here in this soil. Sarah joined them, her arms slipping around her granddaughter's waist. Samuel wanted so badly to tell you, especially after you chose to study agriculture. He saw it as the blood calling to blood, though he could never acknowledge it openly. He knew about me, Olivia asked, still processing this revelation. He kept track of you your whole life, Sarah confirmed. Saved every school photo, every newspaper clipping when you won science fairs. He was so proud when you chose to study at Montana State, though he had to pretend it was just a coincidence when I mentioned it. The revelation seemed to intensify Olivia's determination rather than distract from it. Then we have even more reason to protect this place, she said firmly, not just as an ecological resource or historical property, but as our family legacy. Their moment of connection was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle, not from the back road they had used, but from the main entrance to the farm. Eric's truck appeared around the bend, dust billowing behind it. I called him, Daniel explained to the others, told him Sarah had arrived and that Olivia had completed the financial projections. He agreed to come hear us out. Eric parked and approached cautiously, his eyes moving from Daniel to William before settling on Sarah. The resemblance to Samuel must have struck him immediately, the same determined jaw, the same thoughtful gaze. He stopped a few paces away as if unsure how to proceed. You must be Eric, Sarah said, stepping forward with her hand extended. I'm Sarah Miller. Samuel was my father. Eric took her hand, visibly processing this reality. I still can't believe he never told us. The longer a secret is kept, the harder it becomes to reveal, Sarah said gently. By the time he might have felt free to tell the truth, decades had passed, and he worried about how it would change everyone's understanding of the past. And Eric turned to Olivia, confusion evident on his face. Your cousin, apparently, Olivia replied with a small smile. Or second cousin. We haven't quite figured out the exact relationship yet. Olivia is my granddaughter, Sarah explained. Samuel's granddaughter too, though he could never claim her publicly. Eric shook his head, still struggling to integrate these revelations into his understanding of his family. It's like finding out you've been reading only half a book your whole life and suddenly someone hands you the missing chapters. This unexpected family reunion might have remained awkward, but Olivia skillfully redirected the conversation to the business at hand. I've completed the financial analysis you asked for. Would you like to review it? They gathered around the kitchen table where Olivia had spread out her projections charts and supporting research. With professional precision, she walked Eric through each element of her proposed alternative to the pioneer development, the conservation easements that could provide immediate capital, the phased implementation of agricultural tourism elements, the grant opportunities for historic preservation. The water rights are the key asset, Olivia explained, pointing to a hydrological map of the property. By placing them in a conservation trust, you can generate significant upfront capital while maintaining long-term family control. Several environmental foundations would pay premium prices to protect a water source of this quality. Eric studied the numbers skeptically. At first, his brow furrowed. These conservation easement figures, they seem optimistic. What's your source? I've consulted with the Prairie Watershed Alliance, Olivia replied. They've facilitated similar agreements throughout Montana and Wyoming. These numbers are based on actual transactions adjusted for the exceptional quality and volume of this particular water source. In the agricultural tourism revenue projections, Eric asked. Olivia pulled out a folder of case studies, 3 comparable operations within a 500-mile radius, their actual performance over 5 years, not just projections. I've adjusted downward by 15% to be conservative. As Olivia continued her presentation, Daniel observed Eric's reactions carefully. The initial skepticism was giving way to reluctant interest as Olivia addressed each concern with substantive, well-researched answers. The key difference between this approach and the pioneer deal, Olivia emphasized, is that it keeps control of the most valuable assets, the land and water rights within the family, while still generating the capital you need to address your immediate financial situation. Sarah added her perspective, her voice gentle but clear. I have no interest in disrupting the farm operations or challenging your management, Eric. My connection to this place is emotional, not financial. But I do believe Olivia's approach offers a way to honor Samuel's wishes while addressing your immediate needs. The immediate needs being my massive debt, Eric said bluntly. Let's not dance around it. I borrowed heavily to modernize. The market turned, and now I'm facing foreclosure. That's why the Pioneer deal seemed like the only option. The conservation easement could generate enough capital within 60 days to clear those debts, Olivia pointed out. It's not as immediate as the Pioneer payout would be, but it's a solution that doesn't require selling the land outright. Eric ran a hand through his hair, considering. And what happens to the working farm in this scenario, the 260 acres I'm currently managing? That's where the phase transition comes in, Olivia explained, turning to a detailed timeline. You continue conventional operations on most of the acreage while gradually converting sections to organic certification, which commands premium prices. We develop the tourism and educational components incrementally so there's no disruption to the existing cash flow. As the discussion continued, Daniel observed a subtle shift in Eric's demeanor, from defensive skepticism to reluctant consideration. The numbers were compelling, but perhaps more influential was the living connection to Samuel sitting across the table from him. Sarah's presence made Samuel's wishes impossible to dismiss as mere sentimentality. There's one more factor to consider, William interjected. The town council meeting tomorrow. Pioneer is pushing hard for approval of their zoning changes. If they succeed, they'll likely pursue eminent domain for the water rights if they can't buy them directly. Can they do that? Eric asked, alarmed. They can try, William said grimly. With enough political influence and promises of economic development, small towns have been known to use aggressive tactics, especially when water rights are involved. Blackwood at the bank seems particularly determined, Daniel added. He's been spreading rumors around town trying to undermine our credibility. Blackwood, Eric scoffed. He's been pushing this Pioneer deal hard. Now I'm wondering if he gets some personal sparring we don't know about. Then we need to present a united front at that meeting, Sarah said decisively. All of us, the entire Wilson family, including the branch Samuel, never acknowledged publicly. The significance of her statement wasn't lost on anyone present. Sarah was proposing to step out of the shadows to claim her place as Samuel's daughter publicly after 60 years of secrecy. Are you sure? Daniel asked. Once that door is opened, there's no closing it again. Everyone in town will know. I'm sure, Sarah said firmly. It's time for the truth. All of it. For Samuel, for this land, and for all of us. I'm not ashamed of who I am or where I come from. There will be talk, William warned. Small towns have long memories. Let them talk, Sarah said. I'm too old to worry about gossip, and the stakes are too high to hide behind comfortable fictions. They spent the remainder of the day preparing for the council meeting, gathering documentation, refining arguments, and strategizing about which council members might be persuaded. Eric, though not fully committed to Olivia's alternative plan, agreed to withhold final approval of the Pioneer deal until after the council vote. Olivia dove into creating visual presentations that would make their technical data accessible to the general public. She developed simplified charts showing water flow patterns, economic projections, and comparative job creation figures between their proposal and Pioneer's. People respond to what they can see and understand, she explained as she worked. Abstract concepts about water rights won't move them, but showing how those rights connect to their daily lives might. Daniel focused on gathering testimonials from longtime farming families in the area, documenting their concerns about how Pioneer's development might affect agricultural water access in the coming decades. The history of similar developments in other communities provided cautionary tales about promises made but not kept. Sarah spent time with William reviewing the legal documentation that established her ownership of the 40 acres. Though the trust Samuel had created was legally sound, they anticipated challenges and prepared counter-arguments. As evening fell, they shared a simple meal in the old farmhouse kitchen, the first time branches of Samuel's family separated for 60 years had broken bread together. The conversation flowed more easily now. Stories of Samuel shared from different perspectives, connections discovered, common traits observed. He had this way of tilting his head when he was thinking. Sarah recalled, just slightly to the left. Olivia does the exact same thing. Daniel noted, causing Olivia to self-consciously straighten her head from precisely that position. And that laugh, Eric added unexpectedly, that short surprise laugh when something genuinely amused him. I heard it from Olivia earlier today, William observed. Samuel believes some traits skip generations, said his grandfather had the same habits, and they showed up again in unexpected places. As the evening progressed, Eric shared stories of his own struggles with the farm, the pressure to modernize the rising costs, the difficulty competing with corporate agriculture. His resentment toward Daniel softened as he explained the financial burdens that had driven him toward the Pioneer deal. It wasn't about selling out the family legacy, he admitted. It was about survival. Every year it gets harder to make the numbers work. I took out loans to update equipment, thinking efficiency would save us. Then grain prices dropped, and suddenly I was underwater. That's why our approach has to address the economic realities, Olivia said. Preservation without financial sustainability isn't a solution. After dinner, as they continued preparations for the council meeting, Sheriff Dawson arrived with troubling news. Blackwood's pulled out all the stops, he reported. Pioneer has doubled their promised investment figures and added guarantees about local hiring. They've got business owners and developers lined up to speak tomorrow. Been spreading around economic impact statements claiming the resort will bring in $20 million annually to local businesses. What about our side? Daniel asked. The old farming families are mostly with you, concerned about water rights and changing the character of the community, but they're outnumbered by folks dazzled by promises of economic growth. And some are afraid to speak up, worried about retaliation from Pioneer or the bank. Then we need to change the narrative, Olivia said thoughtfully. Make this about more than just preserving one family farm versus economic development. It needs to be about the community's relationship with its own history and future. The water rights are the key, Sarah added, not just for our farm, but for the entire watershed. If we can help people understand that whoever controls that water effectively controls the future of agriculture, in this region they might see beyond the immediate dollar signs. They worked late into the night refining their presentation and addressing potential counter-arguments. Eric, somewhat to Daniel's surprise, contributed valuable insights about the economic concerns driving support for the Pioneer project. People aren't against preservation, he explained. They're for survival. The farming economy has been struggling for years. Parents worry their children will have to leave to find work elsewhere. That's what makes Pioneer's promises so appealing. Then our alternative needs to address those same concerns, Olivia concluded. Not just preserve the past, but create a viable future jobs, sustainable growth opportunities for the next generation to stay and thrive. Daniel noticed how naturally Olivia and Eric had begun working together, their shared concern for the community's future bridging their different perspectives. The divisions within the family were healing in real time as they focused on the challenge before them. By midnight, they had developed a comprehensive presentation that balanced respect for the community's economic needs with protection of its natural resources and agricultural heritage. Sarah would introduce herself publicly as Samuel's daughter and legal owner of the 40 acres containing the water rights. Olivia would present the alternative development plan with its economic projections and employment potential. Daniel and Eric would speak as representatives of the current Wilson family, presenting a united front despite their different perspectives. We should get some rest, William finally suggested. Tomorrow will test all of us. As the others retired for the night, Daniel found himself once again drawn to the porch where the vast Montana sky spread overhead in a blanket of stars. Sarah joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. Having second thoughts, Daniel asked. About revealing myself publicly. Oh. Yes, Sarah leaned against the porch railing. I've lived with secrets long enough. There's a freedom in truth, even when it's complicated. What about your life in California? Will this change things for you? Sarah considered the question. I've built a good life there, a career I'm proud of, friends I care about, a community that values me. None of that changes. But this, she gestured to the darkened landscape around them, this fills a space that's always been empty, a connection to my roots that I've only experienced through Samuel's stories and photographs. Samuel would be proud of you, of Olivia too. Sarah smiled. And of you, Daniel. He chose well when he left those breadcrumbs for you to follow. I still don't understand why me and not my father or one of his siblings. Because you see the farm the way Samuel did, not just as property, but as a living connection between past and future. Sarah gazed out at the darkened landscape. The others might have protected the land out of duty or sentiment, but you understand its true value. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle chorus of night insects and the occasional rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. Whatever happens tomorrow, Sarah said finally, we've already accomplished something important. Samuel's family is whole again, even if the world didn't know we were broken.